everybody, welcome to the video. So we're taking an early look at week 1 of the NFL season over on DraftKings, talking my favorite players at each position as of right now, and building a lineup throughout the video as we talk about it. And for the rest of the week, I have other content planned, including showdown videos, various other positional breakdowns, core plays, and then a lineup building video to end the week. So if you think that sounds awesome and you're going to hang out for the rest of the season, make sure to leave a like and hit that subscribe button because it really does go a long way. Just a free and easy way to help show your support to the channel. And if you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. If you like my spreadsheet, you can get it there. I have an optimizer, projections, ownership projections, and a Discord community. I have a couple hundred people over there, so I'd be more than happy to have you. Last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the props that they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, for your new signee over on Prize Picks, you can use code CPENN to get a free money bonus. That's an instant deposit match up to $100, and you tell them I sent you. But I think that'll be it for the plugs for the most part. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position, then move on to the rest. And up top, we have the man Patrick Mahomes at $8,100, in which should be a very high-scoring game in Arrowhead versus the Cleveland Browns. If you remember the Browns from last year, and trust me, I'm a Browns fan, so if I ever sound biased towards them, that's the reason why. I just love them too much. But anyway, they were a team that really struggled defensively, especially versus the pass last season, one of the absolute worst teams versus the pass. They have beefed up their defense this year. Their first-round pick was a corner. They got Jadeveon Clowney on the other side of Myles Garrett, so that defensive line is absolutely nasty. They got some linebacker help. The problem is, though, defenses take a little bit to gel. Yes, we've had training camp, OTAs, and preseason games, which is obviously going to help. You're asking a pretty brand new defense to go on the road in Arrowhead in a 53-point over-under versus the best quarterback in football, the best tight end in football, a team that really struggled versus tight ends last year, and an absolute menace in Tyreek Hill who can do damage pretty much just about everywhere. Like, good luck. This is about the toughest task you can get. I realize their price points are super expensive, but there's enough value in week 1 today to make this stack work if you do want to do a full-on Chiefs stack. So Patrick Mahomes, if you have the money for him, great. He's my top projected quarterback, but if you don't, I think there's other good options and other good spots that have better price points. They grade out slightly better point per dollar wise. One of those guys being Kyler Murray at $7,600, who was on fire to start the season last year. He was rushing the ball. He was getting rushing touchdowns each and every single week. He was even throwing the ball well. Well, he ended up getting that bum shoulder. Everything kind of slowed down a little bit, although the last game of the season, Kyler Murray went absolutely off. But at $7,600 here, this is pretty much the best game of the slate. There's going to be a lot of ownership here, so don't think everything's going to be sneaky. We have so many good players. Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, A.J. Brown, Derrick Henry. There's even some good secondary pieces here. Both teams actually played at a pretty fast pace last year. If we look at the pace column, 25 seconds per play for the Cardinals and 25.5 seconds for the Titans. And if you average this up, one of the absolute fastest paced projected games on the entire slate here. We have 51.5 point over-under and a 24.5 implied team total for the Cardinals, and only a 2.5 point spread here. So I'm expecting a back and forth game, and Kyler Murray should definitely be able to do some damage here. He's a guy that loves to run the football. Threw the ball nearly 35 times per game last year, 250 passing yards per game, but what I love the most is the rushing upside. Nearly 50 rushing yards per game last season, over half a rushing touchdown, 6.2 yards per carry. And plus Tennessee last season, they were 30th DVA versus the pass and 28th versus quarterbacks, and we have one of the best fantasy quarterbacks in the entire league. I would honestly not be surprised if Kyler Murray, #1 quarterback this season, over Patrick Mahomes, as long as they both stay healthy at the end of the year for your season-long drafts. So I'm a big fan of Kyler Murray in the spot. So if you want to save about $500 from Patrick Mahomes, I think Kyler Murray's in just about as good of a spot, and they project very similar for me. And then if you want the knockoff version of Kyler Murray, the great value brand version, we have Jalen Hurts here at only $6,400, and pretty much the best matchup you can ask for if you're looking at last year's numbers versus Atlanta, as they allowed the most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. They were dead last, 32nd. And while Jalen Hurts, I'm not playing him because of his passing ability. I'm only playing him because of the fact that he can run the football. When he started last season, his rushing attempts went 18, 11, 9, and 8. His first game, he was over 100 rushing yards, and he had 3 rushing touchdowns in that short 4 or 5 game sample size. And I am typically one that likes to spend down in cash games as far as quarterback goes. I'm not really looking to stack Jalen Hurts. You can play him naked, as he can pretty much get most of the job done on the ground. Like, if he can get us 60 yards on the ground and a touchdown, anything he does through the air is just going to be the icing on top, because he's not going to get like 40 passing yards and 0 touchdowns. He'll probably throw close to 200 passing yards, hopefully get into the end zone once or twice. Graded wide receiver this year with Smith, one of the best college wide receivers, and then you have Jalen Reagor on the outside, and decent tight ends in Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz. This game does feature a 48-point over-under, which is not too bad. I know it's not quite like the first 2 quarterbacks we talked about, but not every game's going to have a 50 plus point over-under, so I think this 48 actually looks pretty good. As I was saying, Atlanta is dead last. They allowed 26.1 DraftKings points per game to the quarterback position, 19th DVA versus the pass, and over 300 passing yards. If Jalen Hurts gets over 300 passing yards, I would be very surprised. Not that I would complain or anything, but I'm definitely looking forward to what he can do on the ground for us. Then moving on over to our lineups, I'm not really trying to build a GPP lineup here, just mainly like a cash game build. We're going to plug in Jalen Hurts for right now. If we can afford the extra money for a Kyler Murray at the end, I'll be more than happy to upgrade there, but I'm going to plug in Hurts for now. That leaves us around $5,500 left per player. And moving on over to the running back position, we have quite a few guys to talk about, whether they be up top or in the middle or down low. But we have Christian McCaffrey up top, $9,500. If you guys are playing cash games this weekend, you're just going to want to plug in CMC. There's a lot of unknowns in week 1 of the NFL season each and every single year, but we know one thing for sure. Christian McCaffrey is going to get the rock, whether it be on the ground or through the air. Sam Darnold will find a way to get him the ball. He's going to get his 20-plus touches. Looking at his numbers last year, in limited time because he was out for a bit, he averaged close to 20 rushing attempts per game and over 6 targets. You're pretty much getting an RB1 and a wide receiver 2 here. Just put Christian McCaffrey in your lineups here. I don't really think you have to explain anything else. He's the best running back in football. And if you want to pivot off of CMC, not that these guys are going to be low owned or anything, but Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry are both in some pretty good spots here. Cook, it's a great matchup versus Cincinnati. And this should be a pretty high scoring game. I think a lot of people are going to stack this game up because there's a lot of options. We have Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook, you got Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, Adam Thielen. I mean, the list goes on. This is a pretty stackable game. Both defenses were not very good this year. I think Minnesota's defense is going to be improved somewhat this season, but I don't think it's going to be elite or anything, and Cincinnati's definitely won't be either. 48-point over-under. We have a team total close to 26 here for the Vikings. They're 3.5-point favorites. Taking running backs that are favorites typically correlates pretty well, but his numbers on the season, over 100 rushing yards per game. He got the volume. He's not quite the pass catcher that Christian McCaffrey is, but he will get a handful of targets each game, over a rushing touchdown per game and 5 yards per carry. And we know he's going to get the rock. And the Bengals last season gave up over 120 rushing yards per game, and they were 24th versus running backs, while also being 21st DVA versus the run. So I definitely like Dalvin Cook as a pivot off of CMC. If you could play both together, that would be absolutely awesome, although I don't think that's going to be super viable on this week's slate, but you could definitely make it work if you want to punt some other positions. Then Derrick Henry, $8,800. He's always usually a tournament play for me unless he's facing like the Houston Texans or the Jacksonville Jaguars, because he typically runs for like 200 yards a game versus those guys and scores like 4 touchdowns. I'm not sure what it is. I know they're terrible, but he just absolutely eats them alive. But he gets a pretty good spot here versus Arizona. They're 2.5-point favorites at home. They have a 27-point implied team total, 51.5-point over-under. This game should be pretty fast-paced and high-scoring, and let's be honest, I would be very shocked if Derrick Henry does not find the end zone in this game. I feel like it's almost impossible. Titans are going to score nearly 28 points here according to Vegas. I'm assuming Derrick Henry is at least going to be responsible for a couple of those. The problem with him is on DraftKings is that we are playing PPR scoring. He does not really catch the football whatsoever, and the guys above him, they do catch the football, and some of the running backs below him will be involved in the passing game, but he only saw 1.5 targets per game last year. He's great with his touches, though, on the ground. I mean, nearly 24 rushing attempts per game and 5.4 yards per carry, but he has a 6% target share and only about a catch per game. So we can't really expect him to do much damage through the air, which kind of hurts his floor a little bit. He cannot get the ball rolling or the Titans fall behind. We saw it last year versus the Browns where they got absolutely blown out in the first half. Derrick Henry did pretty much absolutely nothing in that game. So we got to be careful with Henry. I think he's a good tournament option, but he's definitely not a lock by any means. I would much rather prefer to get up to Dalvin Cook and Christian McCaffrey. But if the Titans are playing with a lead, they could definitely just jam it down Arizona's throat. Plus, now you have to worry not only with A.J. Brown, now you have Julio Jones on the outside, so it should open up some running lanes for Derrick Henry throughout the season. And James Robinson here, $6,400 versus the Houston Texans, who were absolutely awful versus the run last year. Obviously, defenses are going to change, but I don't think we can expect Houston to be good versus running backs once again. They were 29th DVOA versus the run. They allowed 33.6 DraftKings points per game to the running back position, and that was dead last league, close to 150 rushing yards per game, 45 receiving yards per game, and well over a rushing touchdown. He is not going to get the volume that he had last year, where he was the only running back taking snaps in that backfield. Urban Meyer is going to get Carlos Hyde involved, but at $6,400, the amount of volume that he should get, probably close to 20 total touches in this game, because he's going to be involved in the passing game too. I mean, that should be just good enough versus the worst rushing defense in all of football. So $6,400, that does look pretty good. If you're like me, you probably don't like playing Joe Mixon. I feel like he screws me each and every single time, especially in season-long fantasy football. But the projected volume for him, there's no more Gio Bernard. He's going to be more involved in the passing game. We have a 48-point over-under. It'll be a pretty back-and-forth game, only a 3.5-point spread here. But over 20 total touches versus the Minnesota Vikings defense, who was 27th versus running backs last year and 30th DVA versus the run. I mean, Joe Mixon at $6,200 is a pretty good value, in my opinion, for a guy that should see close to 20 rushing attempts, probably get a handful of targets. We get work around the goal line as well, so I definitely like that price point quite a bit. Chris Carson's kind of a pivot off of Joe Mixon, because I assume Joe Mixon will have more ownership than Chris Carson. That's what I'm currently projecting as of right now. But at $5,900, obviously the RB1 in this offense, we are 2.5-point favorites here. We have a team total close to 26. We're on the road in Indy, which I prefer if he was at home. Although last season, I will say they did limit his touches, only around 11.5 carries per game, but he was involved in the passing game, which was nice, at over an 11% target share and nearly 5 yards per carry. I assume his volume is going to get bumped up this season. I like that price point below $6K. Not the best matchup here versus the Colts, but it's mainly just a price play for me. And then if you just want to get more exposure to the Arizona-Tennessee game, we have Chase Edmonds at $4,600, who just feels a little bit underpriced. I don't think he's a cash game play, although I can't fault you for doing it, but I don't think it's really the best way to go. But as far as tournaments go, He's a guy that's going to be involved in the passing game. This should be a high-scoring, high-paced game, which I think does profile pretty well for a guy like Chase Edmonds. James Conner is here. He's going to get some work, but Chase Edmonds should be the RB1 here. He did boast over a 12% target share last season with 4 targets per game, and we should see around a handful of targets, should get some damage on the ground, maybe he gets into the end zone, maybe not, but even then I think he can pay off his price point at $4,600 versus a team that allowed the 26th most points to fantasy running backs last season. So moving on over to our lineup, I think the obvious thing here to do is just to plug in CMC. We kind of already went over that, but I mean, you can't go wrong with Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, really any of these guys, even Alvin Kamara, but I just prefer to put in CMC. I think he's the safest overall play. He's got a high ceiling and a very high floor. It's very hard for CMC to bust most weeks, plus it's a good matchup versus the New York Jets. And then we're going to plug in, we could go with pretty much anybody here, it just depends on our roster construction. If we put in a Dalvin Cook, that's kind of hurt us a little bit, considering we'd only have $4,100 left per player. We could make that work, but as of right now, I think the way to go is just to plug in a mid-range running back like Joe Mixon. I think he's probably your best RB2 as far as cash games go, just because of the projected volume. He's a talented back. This should be a decent offense this season. The offensive line should be a little bit improved, so we'll plug those two in for right now. When I play cash games, I typically like to go 3 running backs, but we'll leave the flex for the end to see what kind of salary we have left. Moving on over to wide receivers, it's kind of as simple as this. Whoever your quarterback is, play the corresponding wide receiver. If you're using Mahomes, use Hill. If you're using Ryan Tannehill, use A.J. Brown. If you're using Kyler Murray, use Hopkins, and you guys get the idea. Aaron Rodgers with Davante Adams. Now, as far as cash games go, Davante Adams is obviously the guy you're going to want in the most, although that kind of reflects in the price point here at $8,300. I'm not sure how viable that's going to be, especially if you're spreading up for other positions, maybe like a Kyler Murray or a Mahomes, or you're spending up for CMC or Travis Kelce, whatever it may be. So we'll probably maybe not be able to fit in Davante Adams, although we'll kind of figure that out when we build our lineup. But speaking of Adams here, $8,300, I mean, nothing bad to say here. Matchup versus New Orleans is it is what it is, but we have 49.5 point over under, 26.5 implied team total. He has Aaron Rodgers, last year's MVP, throwing the football. And his volume last season was pretty insane, close to 100 receiving yards per game, over 10 targets, over a touchdown per game. His touchdowns were absolutely insane last season. I'm not sure if he's going to keep up that pace, but Aaron Rodgers does what he wants on the field. When they get to the goal line, he has no problem at all calling passes to Adams, so I'm not really sure that will regress too much. 34% target share, 79% weight opportunity share, just kind of some overall insane numbers, and I'm definitely all about Adams. So if you have the money for him, great. He is the best play wide receiver. Tyreek Hill, I already talked about Patrick Mahomes, so it kind of just corresponds with that, where this should be a very high-scoring game. Tyreek Hill is a burner, man. He can beat any defense deep. He can do damage if he gets the ball short. He can take it to the house. He can do pretty much anything. He can line up anywhere on the field, so I definitely think he's a great pairing option with Mahomes. I don't think that really needs to be said. Calvin Ridley at $7,900. He averages like 4 or 5 more points per game in his career when Julio Jones was off the field. Obviously, you know Julio Jones now. He's going to be the bona fide wide receiver one in this offense, and I mean, I think we should probably expect close to 100 yards per game with a chance of a touchdown each and every single week for Calvin Ridley throughout the season. Plus, we get a pretty good matchup here versus the Philadelphia Eagles, who weren't that great versus wide receivers last season, as they were 24th DVA versus the pass and 24th versus fantasy wide receivers, allowing close to 200 receiving yards per game. And this offense is pretty much just Calvin Ridley and Kyle Pitts as far as the passing game goes. Yes, a guy like Russell Gage will be involved, but Calvin Ridley is definitely the alpha dog here, and I like him being below $8,000 for his perceived volume that he should have. DeAndre Hopkins, $7,800. Tennessee was pretty brutal versus the pass last year. He's really the only obvious stacking option with Kyler Murray. He's not that expensive at $7,800. Stephon Diggs here, I don't love the matchup versus Pittsburgh. They were actually very stingy versus wide receivers last season. They were first DVA versus the pass, and they allowed the 9th fewest points per game to wide receivers. So why do I like Stephon Diggs? Well, he's one of the most talented wide receivers in football. The Bills do not run the ball. Like, they just can't. Devin Singletary and Zach Moss are not guys to be trusted. Josh Allen will probably chuck the ball over 40 times per game this year, and look, Stephon Diggs was the man last season. I don't believe he had one game below double-digit fantasy points all season long. Super consistent. Over 10 targets per game. Close to 100 receiving yards per game. A 30% target share. Pretty similar numbers to Davante Adams, and he comes at nearly $1,000 cheaper. The matchup sucks, but I think Stephon Diggs can definitely overcome that. A.J. Brown. So I'm kind of curious on what people are going to do with him this week, because he's kind of at an awkward price point where he's not super cheap, but he's not super expensive. I mean, you know the guy's an absolutely awesome wide receiver. The problem is they added Julio Jones, so I think a lot of casuals are going to be thinking, well, Julio Jones is the alpha dog here, and A.J. Brown's going to slide right on over to be the wide receiver too. But A.J. Brown's the guy here. He's the wide receiver one. He was awesome last year. I definitely think there's room for improvement. I mean, the guy's still young, and he's going to be an absolute beast in the NFL, and I like this price point quite a bit. Should be a pretty high-paced, high-scoring game, and I want all the exposure I can get to it. So A.J. Brown at $7,100 definitely looks really good in my opinion. Maybe more of a tournament option, but he can definitely pay off and win you the week. Moving down to some wide receiver 2s or wide receiver 3s, we have Brandon Ayuk, $5,700. Probably more of a tournament option here because we are 7.5 point favorites. The 49ers could probably do a lot of running in this game, especially in the second half. But Ayuk's in a fantastic matchup versus the Detroit Lions. For 32nd DVA versus the pass last season, and allowed the third most points per game to the wide receiver position, over 200 receiving yards per game. I love targeting second-year wide receivers because they tend to break out a bit, and Brandon Ayuk is one of those guys that I'm really targeting in season-long drafts because I think the ceiling's the moon here, so I'm loving Ayuk at $5,700. Probably more of a tournament guy, but you could play him in cash games. I wouldn't fault you for that. Close to 8 targets per game last year with a 23% target share. T. Higgins at $4,700, kind of a crowded wide receiver group here with Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, and T. Higgins. But T. Higgins at this price point, I would say is my favorite of the three here. And Jamar Chase really struggled in the preseason. I think I saw a stat where he had 5 targets, 4 drops. Definitely wasn't looking too hot. Plus, there was the separation issues people were talking about during training camp. Higgins was solid last season, about 6.5 targets per game, 18.9% target share. And obviously, these things are going to change a little bit because of the addition of Jamar Chase. I mean, not everything's going to be the exact same. Did have an 8 out of 11.7 last year, and the Vikings really struggled versus wide receivers. They were 27th, 14th DVA versus the pass, and allowing 42 DraftKings points per game to the position. So at that price point, definitely think T. Higgins is an option, whether it be cash games or tournaments. Then you have the 2 chalk cheap wide receivers in Marvin Jones and Callaway. I would probably end up playing both, to be honest, because they're going to allow you to fit in guys like a Devontae Adams with a CMC or a Travis Kelce, whatever you prefer. Definitely won't be able to afford all 3 of those guys, but 2 of the 3 are definitely viable. Jones has gotten a lot of buzz this season, especially in the preseason and training camp, and I mean, at $3,600, he gets a great matchup versus Houston, just an overall absolutely terrible defense. They were 26 versus wide receivers last season. There's other wide receivers here, but Marvin Jones at $3,600 is too good to pass up for me, so I will take that all day. But this is purely just a price play. Then Callaway, $3,400. I mean, all the hype about him in the preseason. He's pretty much the only target here. There's no Emmanuel Sanders, no Michael Thomas, no Jared Cook. It's pretty much just him and Alvin Kamara. Jameis Winston getting the starting job, I'd say, is definitely a boost for him because he can get the ball down the field to him. So Callaway, $3,400. The matchup versus Green Bay I wouldn't say is exactly ideal, but we have a near 50-point over-under and a 3.5-point spread, so I'm expecting a decent amount of scoring in this game. And Callaway, the wide receiver 1 here, don't look at his numbers last season. They mean absolutely nothing to me whatsoever. The Packers were actually a lot worse versus the run compared to the pass last season, allowing the 4th fewest points per game, and Jerry Alexander is not a great matchup here, but this is purely just a price and volume play. That's all we can ask for as far as fantasy goes. And then moving on to our lineup here. So the 2 obvious options that I'm going to play, it's going to be Marvin Jones and Callaway. I'm not sure what I want to do with my wide receiver 1 yet, so we're going to leave that till the end, but let's just plug in the 2 obvious guys, because if you're playing cash games this weekend, just plug these 2 guys in. They're going to get the volume, and their prices are just too good to pass up. And plus, Marvin Jones gets a great matchup versus Houston. So if we plug those 2 guys in, we have $5,200 left per player, which should be just fine. So we can just throw in a cheap defense, so we'll have plenty of money to make a good lineup here. Then moving on over to tight ends, it's pretty much Travis Kelce and everybody else, and it's been that way for a couple years now. Yes, guys like Darren Waller, George Kittle are always going to be fine options. Darren Waller's on Monday, though, so he's not even on this slate. Kelce is pretty much a wide receiver 1 out there. Like, he is not like any other tight end. If you look at his numbers, it rivals wide receiver 1s in the league. Close to 100 receiving yards per game, 7 catches, close to double-digit targets, close to a touchdown per game, and over a 25% target share. No other tight end comes close to those numbers. The Browns should have a decent defense this season. They did add a new safety, which would definitely make life a little bit harder for Kelce here, but the linebacker group is still not that great. Last season, they allowed over half a touchdown per game, and they were allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. So Travis Kelce should be able to have his way here, although it gets really pricey, $8,300 for a tight end. And if you're spending up for 1 wide receiver, a running back like CMC, it's not going to be easy to fit in Travis Kelce. So you're probably not going to be able to get up here in cash games. If you can, great. He's definitely the biggest positional advantage of everybody else because at wide receiver, yeah, Adams is the top option. Then you have Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins right below him, or just about as good. And then you have CMC, who, yeah, best running back, but then you have Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry right below him. And moving on to the rookie, we have Kyle Pitts, $4,400. I'm expecting a lot of ownership here. People are going to be excited to play him. I mean, it's pretty much just him and Calvin lead the passing game here. He's going to be lined up all over the field, and he should do a lot of damage. I mean, the guy was drafted in the 1st round. He could potentially have the best rookie tight end season of all time. Not that I'm projecting that, but it's certainly in the cards for him. The guy is going to be awesome in the NFL, and he does get a pretty good matchup here versus Philly, so I love that price point quite a bit. Probably going to be the guy that we slide in for cash games. Austin Hooper at $4,000. The Chiefs are pretty tough versus the pass in general. They do struggle versus tight ends. They were 26 versus them last year, allowing close to 15 DraftKings points per game and 60 receiving yards. And Baker Mayfield looked his way quite a few times in those few drives that he had in the preseason game versus Atlanta. We have a 53-point over-under here, and they are 6.5-point dogs on the road. So I'm assuming the Browns are going to have to throw more than they like because they are a run-first team. But Austin Hooper, I think he should have a healthy dose of targets here. And I'd say there's a halfway decent chance he could find the end zone if they get around the goal line. So I do like Hooper at that price point if you can't quite afford Kyle Pitts. And then if you're looking for a dirt cheap punt option here, we have Anthony Firkser. There's no more Jonnu Smith, and it's just really getting cheap exposure to this game. 27-point implied team total. If we can get a cheap touchdown here at $3,200. And moving back to our lineup, as far as tight end goes, if we plugged in Travis Kelce, like I would love to do that. That's only going to give us $4,200 left per player, which we could make work. Like, we're going to plug in a really cheap defense, and then we could get another cheap wide receiver. Like, it's possible. I'm just not sure it's the way I want to go. So as far as right now, I want to put in Kyle Pitts just because he's the rookie. There's a lot of upside there, $4,400. Should see over a handful of targets like the matchup versus Philly. I feel like that's probably the best way to go. That leaves us $5,500 left per player, which makes me feel a little bit better. And then as far as defense goes, I hate even having to play defenses. I wish DraftKings would get rid of them at some point, maybe add an extra flex spot. I think that'd be a lot better. Typically, we just try to pick good defenses and good matchups or teams that are cheap at home and they're slight favorites. So 49ers, they get Detroit. No concerns there. They should be just fine. They're on the road, but this is a good defense. Only a 19-point implied team total against them, and they're 7.5-point favorites. The Jaguars, not really a defense I'm going to count on too much this season, but they get to face Houston. Obviously, no Deshaun Watson, no really anybody good at this point. So you can sign me up for them. They're 3.5-point favorites here, and only a 44.5-point over-under with a 20.5 implied team total against them. The Bills don't really want to attack Pittsburgh too much here because they do have some really good receiving options, plus Najee Harris. But they're 6.5-point favorites at home here, and Big Ben is definitely prone to turnovers. We saw that many times last season, especially in his last game in the playoffs where the Browns just picked him apart. And that was not a good Browns defense. That was a bad Browns defense, but he made them look really good. And the Falcons are absolutely free here versus Philadelphia Eagles, who, yes, I do have interest in Jalen Hurts, and I will be more than likely playing him in cash games. So I don't think Jalen Hurts is going to come out here with over 500 yards, 5 touchdowns, and the Eagles put up 40 points. They're probably going to only put up a couple touchdowns here, maybe a couple field goals, which I'm for Atlanta, plus they're the bare minimum at $2,000. They're at home. They're 3.5-point favorites, and a 22.25 implied team total against them. But that's pretty much as far as defense will go. I don't want to talk any more about them. Then moving back over to our lineup, I just want to finish this off with a cheap defense here. I want to use the Falcons, but I already have Jalen Hurts, so obviously, that doesn't make sense correlation-wise, so I'll plug in the next cheapest one, which is the Buffalo Bills at home versus Pittsburgh against Ben Roethlisberger, who is definitely prone to some turnovers recently. So it's going to leave us $7,000 left per player. I plan the flex, usually in cash games, it's to plug in another running back that's going to see some volume. And since we have $7,000 left, I want to try to fit in one of these 7K or 8K wide receivers. So if I plug in Devontae Adams, that's going to leave us $5,700 left. And I know guys like Chris Carson, James Robinson are a little bit more expensive than that. So I'm not really sure exactly where I'm going to go at wide receiver yet. So we're going to plug in just one of those running backs. I think for now we should plug in James Robinson just because of the matchup, and he should see close to 20 total touches, which just fine versus Houston. So it's going to leave us $7,600 left, which is around the range of guys like DeAndre Hopkins, AJ Brown, Stephon Diggs, Calvin Ridley. I think we're just missing out on Calvin Ridley. I want to say $7,800 or $7,900. Just correct, and we're just missing out on DeAndre Hopkins. But that leaves us Stephon Diggs. I don't love the matchup versus Pittsburgh, but he's one of the most heavily targeted wide receivers in all football. He's very talented. Josh Allen's going to throw the ball pretty much the entire game, so I had no problem plugging that in for a cash game. So I think that's actually a pretty good cash game lineup. It's going to be a lot of chalk, but as far as cash games go, and the chalk is just fine. So I have Jalen Hurts, CMC, Joe Mixon, the 2 chalk options in Marvin Jones and Callaway, Stephon Diggs, Kyle Pitts, James Robinson, and the Bills defense. That's going to use the entire salary that we have, all $50,000. But with that being said, I think that'll be pretty much it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. There's a lot of extra content on there that I think you will find helpful throughout the season, including my entire spreadsheet, optimizer ownership projections, cheat sheets with notes, and my Discord community. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by PrizePicks, just you versus the projections. And as of right now, if you're new signing over there, you can use code CPEN to get a free money bonus. That's an instant deposit match up to $100 when you tell them I sent you. Follow me over on social media. I'm at ChrisPennell16 on Twitter or CPEN16 over on IG. But I think that's going to be pretty much it. I will stop rambling, and I'll see you guys in the next video.